Hey y'all, it's Elizabeth Weimler, and I am coming at you with another Who's in the News. Big name coming at you, Anne Heche. So, for those of you that don't know, she was in a severe accident in California, hit a garage, and then ultimately ended up in another house in a fiery wreck, and they had to get her out. She ended up passing away due to her injuries from that, just couldn't, her body couldn't sustain. So they took her off life support, donated her organs, and she passed away. But I thought, well, let's take a look at her chart because that's what I do. So we're going to take a look at her chart. Let me share my screen with you so that you can see it. Because obviously y'all want to see what's going on in her chart, as well as with the what is the word I'm looking for? With the transits going on. She, again, she was an actress. She did many things. Not as well known as, say, Nancy Pelosi, who you should go check out her video that I did as well. It was posted before this one by a couple days. But, Anne she did have an impressive career, an impressive life. So let's take a look. And we're going to take a look at the transits that triggered as well. Sorry, I'm jumping around right now. We're going to take a look at the transits that triggered the accident as well once we look at her birth chart. So again, her fiery accident was on August 5th. She was taken off life support and passed away on August 14th of 2022. She did win a Daytime Emmy Award for her role in the soap opera Another World. But she was born on May 25th, 1969 at 4:51 p.m. in Aurora, Ohio. Easy for me to say. It's a suburb between Cleveland, Ohio, and Akron, I believe Akron. So with her time of birth, she is a Virgo ascendant, which sets up her chart and becomes her first house. So in her first house, she has Jupiter and the node of moon K2. And then she also has Uranus in there, but I'm not going to talk about the outer planets. So Jupiter in the first house could make her much more optimistic, much more glass half full person. She could be inspirational and compassionate. She could have good children. She could be very enterprising, very friendly, and very enthusiastic. And she likely had a good sense of humor. She could at times feel bulletproof, which she would need to have been cautious of. And she would have needed to have been very cautious of becoming overly optimistic and losing touch with the practical reality of the world. K2 in the first house could have given her a feeling of being hard to understand or hard to know. She could have at times felt like she really didn't fit in anywhere. But she could have a very creative and action-oriented perspective. Her life could have many surprises. She could have been impatient in nature, and she could have been very quick-minded. Mercury rules her first house, and it does go to her ninth house, which does indicate her being someone that's very ethical, very truthful. Her father may have been kind of a powerful influence on her life, but her father could have struggled or had health issues. Jupiter rules her fourth house, and being in the first house indicates that really, personal efforts would be really rewarded through constant learning. So the more she learned, the more effort she put in, the more she was rewarded. It can indicate that, her family really instilled great values in her and that she kind of had a sense of security from her family. However, I'm going to put this out there. Jupiter is very closely conjunct K2. They are within 2 degrees, just slightly under 2 degrees. This can indicate feeling kind of a lack of security and a loss of home. So she could have moved around a lot, which would be loss of home, which would give her a lack of security. It could have been a harder relationship with her mother. It could have just been a harder family life. So that really tight conjunction of Jupiter and K2 makes a huge difference in her chart. Jupiter K2, as well as, we'll get there, but moon's in her 12th house, but Jupiter K2 and her moon are all in the same lunar mansion of Uttara Falguni. This indicates that she could really associate well with people in power. She could get financial benefit from them. She could be a good communicator and really have a love of luxury and comfort. She could be very socially smart and generally just lucky and fortunate. She was someone that likely, had times when she was either sad or angry under that happy smile. So she wouldn't let on she was feeling down, and no one would know unless they really knew her and dug deep. She had the potential where she could have settled for anyone, which could lead her to becoming involved in kind of more codependent relationships. Her ascendant is in the lunar mansion of Chitra. This could make her really elegantly restrained. She could be well dressed, she could be well read, and she really possessed that charisma and personal charm. In her third house of Scorpio is Mars. Mars is in its own sign of Scorpio, but Mars in the third house can indicate that she could have had this competitive drive to win at all costs. She could be prone to having issues with siblings, especially brothers, and she could accomplish tasks quickly. She could have a short fuse and she could be prone to travel accidents, but she could have a very sharp mind and kind of that try anything attitude. She was someone that was going to work hard. She, however, would need to be careful as she could be prone to accidents, surgeries, and excessive bleeding. Mars, as I mentioned, is in its own sign of Scorpio, which means it rules her third house, and being in the third house indicates that she really had that interest in all forms of creativity. She had that ability to get the results with minimum effort. She could find success in acting, art, music, or sales. Mars also rules her eighth house, and being in the third house can indicate that her siblings could have had a difficult life or even die young. But she could have this real uncanny communication ability. She could have kind of that super sensory abilities in the arts and acting. She could have been kind of more bohemian or unconventional in her approach to life, which the little I knew of her, I would say was absolutely true. But Mars is in the lunar mansion of Jesta, indicating that she was likely the most successful person in her family. She really had the ability to keep friends and build a good support network around herself. She was very self-reliant, and she had the ability to manifest what she focused on, past tense. Below the surface, she would have to be careful. She could be very impatient, and she may have really been someone that really searched for that deeper meaning in life. In her seventh house of Pisces, we have Venus and the node of the moon, Rahu. Venus is in its strongest sign of Pisces, and it's at its exact degree actually of exaltation. So this can indicate that her partners could receive more attention, which could be harder on the relationships. She was someone that was very capable of relating to anybody and anything. She was someone who liked to have a relationship, especially in terms of romance and sexual attention. So if she wasn't getting that, she was probably out. Didn't stay long, but she could be very persuasive and artistic. She could care deeply for others with a true compassion for them. She could have this real love of beauty and luxury. Rahu in the seventh can indicate that her partner could be very powerful and successful, but kind of obsessive in their work. She could really kind of benefit from non-traditional partnerships, and her partner could be out of the ordinary. She could be subject to divorce or separation with Rahu in the seventh, but she could also be prone to venereal diseases. Venus rules her second house, and in the seventh house indicates that her partner could really spend too much or be too materialistic, and could be more successful when she was in partnerships. Jupiter rules her seventh house, and as we mentioned, Jupiter is in her first house, which indicates that she may do a lot with her partner, which will bring them together more. It's going to unite them. It's going to make them stronger. But she could be prone to losing herself in those relationships. So she needs to be careful. She needed to be careful that she didn't let her sense of self-identity become the relationship. She was someone that could closely identify with her partner, which would kind of add power to her life. She could be someone that could also have more than one partner at a time, so she would have had to watch the cheating side of things. Venus also rules her ninth house, and in her seventh house really indicates that she could have been attracted to a partner that reminded of her father. She could get a lot of advantages from being in a relationship. She really knew how to relate well to others, in terms of like a real strength of hers. Rahu is in the lunar mansion of Uttara Bhadrapada, which can indicate, really discipline with speaking abilities. She may have a love of solitude and seclusion. She could be very ethical and would tend to make money on her own. Venus is in a different lunar mansion. It is in Revati, which indicates that she could be a very sweet, caring, responsible friend, but she could have faced many disappointments in her early life. She could be very fortunate and promoted quickly. And she was someone who was brave in the face of setbacks. So Venus conjunct Rahu can indicate that she could be unique and talented in some distinct, out of the ordinary way. She could be at times unhappy in relationships and have affairs because of that unhappiness. In her 8th house, she has Saturn. So Saturn is at its weakest state in Aries, which means she's just going to have to work harder to achieve that planetary energy. So she can gain wisdom through her life experiences. She could have become weary with the kind of superficial ways of the world. She was someone who could keep secrets and confidences, but she may have feared abandonment or disappointment in her life. And she could have had a very troubled early life. She is someone who was going to work long and hard to accomplish her goals. And, for her, things would get better as she got older, as she had more experiences. So they'd get better over time. This can actually, Saturn in the 8th can be an indication that she could be in a violent accident. Saturn rules her 6th house. Saturn rules her 6th house of Aquarius. And being in her 8th house, it can indicate that she could have acute illnesses that could be hard to diagnose. Saturn also rules her 5th house. That's what I was thinking. I did those backwards. And being in her 8th house, it can really indicate that she could, enjoy fantasy or science fiction, whether she acted in it, read it, enjoyed watching it, any of the above. She could have also at times had a more confused mind, so it could have been too much going on in her head. Ruler of the 5th and the 8th, so Saturn ruling the 5th and the 8th, her children could go through difficulty due to conflict or possible divorce. Saturn is in the lunar mansion of Ashwini. And so this really gave her that zeal and zest for life. She could have that restless, impatient nature, rushing off without planning ahead. She was someone who could be very self-sufficient, and she could have that desire to go fast. So she would need to watch her speed. Fascinating how she passed away and how she died. I will just say that. So that's her 8th house. Moving on to her 9th house. She has Sun and Mercury in her 9th house of Taurus. Sun in the 9th house can really indicate that she could have problems with her father. He could have been much more controlling or overbearing. She was someone that could be very ethical and fair-minded. She could have good fortune. She really had that ability to handle people well. She was someone that may have enjoyed music and literature. Mercury in the 9th house can really indicate that travel and education could have been a focus throughout her life. She could be very open-minded. She could have a career that related to mass communication. She could have good fortune and be a very innovative thinker, almost kind of ahead of her time, but she could be creative with good reasoning and very good at speaking. My guess is she had a playful sense of humor with this placement as well, but she could, while she could be open-minded, she definitely had her opinions and she could be opinionated. Mercury rules her 10th house, and being in the 9th house can indicate, that she could have a high-level career with abundant blessings. Travel could be a part of her work. She was an actress. It was. Sun rules her 12th house, and in her 9th house can indicate there are losses through her father and or that her father was not around or was detached. It can also indicate she and her father were kind of at odds with each other and did not have the best relationship. Sun and Mercury are in the same lunar mansion of Rohini, which indicates that she was, charismatic. She was a good communicator. She had innate inner strength. She could be fixed in her purpose, and she could have had a love of art, music, and really the finer things in life. But she really had this ability to rise to the top and achieve her desires in life. Her final house we're going to look at is the 12th house of Leo. She has Moon in the 12th, which could have caused her to be overly sensitive. She could have a very good memory, but would need to make sure that she didn't get stuck living in the past, replaying the events over and over again. She needed to learn how to let them go to be able to move forward in life. She could have had issues. Moon is an indicator of the mother, so she could have had issues with her mother or felt that her mom was unavailable. She could be prone, and could be very prone to emotional turmoil. She was someone who took pride in her work. She could be ambitious for recognition, and she could work in front of people, but she could have this potential to have fits of anger. So she would have needed to watch that she didn't let that get the best of her. Moon rules her 11th house, and in the 12th house can indicate that charities could have been a huge part of her life. She could have been kind of more of a loner with a feeling of hopelessness at times. That's kind of broad overview of Anne Heche's natal chart. Let's kind of look at what triggered the, accident. I've got transits up down here for you, severe accident, which was on August 5th of 2022. So at the time of her accident, she was in her, wow, I can't talk. She was in her Jupiter moon. So Jupiter Mahadasha, moon subdasha. Jupiter is the ruler of her 7th house. It is a Marika planet for her chart. Marika planet just means it's a killer planet. So the second ruler of the 2nd and the ruler of the 7th are the 2 Marika planets for her. Jupiter, again, ruler of the 7th. Her Jupiter is conjunct her natal Ketu within 2 degrees, which can be an indicator of loss. Her natal moon is in her 12th house of liberation and loss. So the fact that she was in her Jupiter moon dasha sequence is big. 12th house can also be, as I just mentioned, it's the house of liberation and loss, but it can also be that house that opens the door to our ultimate peace, which is leaving this earth and leaving this body. Mars was transiting in Aries at the time of the accident. The 8th house is the house of transformation. It's the house of death. It was conjunct wide orb, but it was conjunct her natal Saturn, ruler of her 6th house of health. So Mars was also sending its energy by its 8th aspect to her natal Mars in the 3rd house. And natal Mars can be a trigger for accidents, especially given the transit of Mars through her 8th house. Transiting Ketu is in her 2nd house of Libra at that time. And, that can be an indicator of loss. Marika house, 2nd house, as I mentioned a little earlier, Marika house is 2nd house is a marker killer house. Transiting Ketu was sending its energy to her 8th house in natal Saturn. And oddly, transiting moon was exactly conjunct transiting Ketu in her 2nd house on this day. So moon can be a trigger since she is in her moon subdasha. And for Virgos, the moon ruling the 11th house is actually a very hard planet for Virgos. So transiting Ketu was also exactly opposite transiting Uranus, which can be very unexpected loss. And then transiting Rahu was obviously, because the nodes are always in opposition, transiting Rahu was exactly conjunct transiting Uranus, which can bring erratic behavior and unexpected events. So I do think there were indications of what triggered her accident. It has kind of come out what caused it, kind of not. I've seen differing reports, but I just wanted to give a little bit after going through all of this. When I went to see kind of what I always do these, I do them before even looking up, outside of looking up the birth time. I don't look up anything about the individuals. I don't want to know. I want to see how their chart holds. For those that don't know who Anne Heche is, a little information I found on her life after I finished this, as I just mentioned. Her biggest celebrity relationship was with Ellen DeGeneres. She moved 11 times before the age of 12 years old, which can be that Jupiter Ketu conjunction, Jupiter ruling her 4th house, Ketu being loss of home. She was by far the biggest earner in her family. And then she did have a very hard relationship with her father. He was very promiscuous. He died of HIV/AIDS at the age of 45 when she was 13. A few months after her father's death, her brother died in a single car accident. When she talked about it, had said that she thought it was potentially him trying to commit suicide, but they did rule it an accident. In interviews, Anne had said that her father raped her from infancy until she was 12 and had given her genital herpes. And she had left a couple of her relationships for other relationships. So she did have affairs. Kind of other things that I found about her, she was one of the women that accused Harvey Weinstein of sexual harassment. And her accident was actually kind of that 2-in-1. So as I mentioned, she hit a garage and sped off, ultimately hitting the house where her car became engulfed in flames. The early reports did mention she was under the influence, but they have stopped investigations since she was taken off of life support, and she was able to be, what she ultimately wanted was to be an organ donor, and her organs were given to people who needed them. So, she lived this extraordinary life, even though it was shorter. Her memory is going to live on with her children and the lives of those she knew and the individuals who received her organs. So she made a huge difference in people's lives, even though she's not, as big of a name as, say, Julia Roberts. But she's done a lot. So like and follow for more videos. Share with friends if you found it interesting. If you want to subscribe to my free newsletter, it comes to your inbox. It gives you insights on, it gives you all of this, as well as giving you insights on what's happening astrologically. And, at the start of each month, I do sign prediction videos. It's really more kind of the astrological forecast, kind of astro forecast of what's going on, what to expect. 70%, kind of can just happen, but there's still free will. There's still 30% going on. So again, if you enjoyed this, like and follow, leave a comment. If there might be somebody you want to see from the news, let me know. I'm always open to suggestions as well. I try to hit the big people. I try to I'm doing about 2 a month right now. They do take time. They do take focus, along with everything else going on. So until next month, I hope all of you, or until next Who's in the News next month, clearly where my head is. Until the next Who's in the News, I hope everybody has a great day, and I will see you for next Who's in the News.